Welcome back for another episode of the Eating Disorder Recovery for Women podcast. Before we dive into this episode, I want to read you a very awesome review that the podcast got from Little I. She says, I used to compete in the NPC bikini division, and so many of the things I needed to do are the things Cara describes in her self-care episode. I was literally at the doctor's appointment getting scolded by the doctor and told I needed to do all the things she talks about. This is a must listen for anyone whose relationship with food is in need of repair, especially all my NPC sisters. So thank you, Little I, for that amazing review. It really does help other listeners see if the podcast can really help them. It's proof right there. Today's episode is about reframing your triggers. So triggers are something that happen all the time when you struggle with an eating disorder or you're recovering from something like an addiction. Even trauma can lay under the surface and kind of just exist, and then we feel triggered. And a lot of times people have PTSD from experiences they have, like a very traumatic experience. But in the context of this episode, this is going to be specifically about when somebody has an eating disorder and you go about your daily life, then someone comes along and makes a comment about how you look or something that you're eating, or you're at the doctor. The doctor is always a really triggering one. And this episode is about using those moments as a way to improve, a call to action to actually transform, and how we can actually take those and use those to our advantage in recovery. So there are definitely levels to this. And there were times that I was so freaking fragile to triggers that I would just crumble every single time somebody made a negative comment. I remember there was a time at my very first job as a phlebotomist in the hospital, where my coworker, bless her heart, we're from different cultures, and for some reason I don't understand this. I don't think that this should be a thing that anyone says to any person. But she was like, "Oh, it looks like you've gained weight." And I was like, I didn't know what to say. I think I came up with something stupid to say because I was just so shocked that she would say anything. And I was like, oh, my worst nightmare has come true. So these moments where people that you don't really know very well come to you, maybe they're from a different culture, sometimes they come to you and they make comments on your body. These are the moments that can really catch us off guard, and even if you have recovered, they can still trigger you and put you in a place where you feel like maybe I should bring those eating disorder those eating disorder behaviors back in. And sometimes it's not even conscious. Sometimes you just notice yourself doing it. And this is the part where we need to be very aware during a recovery and what we're vulnerable to. So number one is developing your comebacks. So in the free guide that I always mention in each episode that's in the show notes, the guide that is for helping you to overcome fear of weight gain and eating disorder recovery, we talk about my favorite comebacks that you can also use to improve your confidence and also stand up for yourself when people give you unsolicited advice, because we can't control what other people do. We can only control what we do and how we react. Sometimes when you feel triggered, it's really easy to say, now I have the excuse to do whatever behavior it is. I can't help it. I have no power over this. But we have to actually say, we do have power over the situation and take responsibility into our own hands. So one way that you can do that today is go get the free guide in the show notes of this episode, so you can start coming up with your own comebacks to defend yourself and become more resilient when it comes to these comments that people make, because we can't control that. Now, not all of it is bad when people make comments about us. Sometimes it is a compliment, but a lot of times people will say things that make you feel a certain way that they didn't even mean to do. And so it can really hurt. And sometimes we just have to learn the skill of telling people what would be more supportive during this time. It is really up to you on how close you are with somebody to be willing to open up and be vulnerable about that. It's more likely that you'll want to have that conversation with somebody like, in your immediate circle, some people that you feel close to, that you have a relationship with. And you can set a boundary with certain kinds of comments by sharing how that affects you. The second one is understanding that when somebody makes you feel a tornado of emotions with certain comments, or something happens where you feel that emotion, that is a clue to your state of mind and perspective on an issue. So you can use that moment as a way to look inside of where your beliefs are at, your head, and it helps you point in the direction of where can you start to make progress on, because in the end, we don't want to be staying at a place where we feel so triggered by a comment or like a certain number on the scale or a certain situation that happens. We don't want to stay at that place. We want to look at that and we want to improve. That is, if you're listening to this episode, I would think that that's where your head is at. That's the direction you want to go. So, and number 3 is seeking out the next level help that you need. So I am a huge proponent of seeking out coaching, therapy, books. I talk to my mentor whenever I'm feeling stressed out. I even, I have overwhelming emotions that I'm dealing with. And this happens as we develop and we grow in certain areas of our lives and we take on new challenges. We have these new insecurities, we have these fears, and sometimes we feel like the worst is going to come to pass. Whenever I'm looking for constructive criticism on like an outsider's perspective of how I'm reacting, a lot of times I'll ask my mentor or my therapist or my coach, what are they noticing and what is their insight on my reaction and how I'm perceiving things, because I'll explain to them. All this saying, I just want to remind you that we are human, having a human experience, and sometimes you just have to let it all out. Like, we all have to do that sometimes. But sometimes being real with ourselves when we're not moving forward in a certain area and we're back at the same challenge and our emotions are causing a lot of anxiety and we just are feeling very negative, it's time to get some help in this area. Outside perspective can really help you, because when you have a heart that's hungry for change and you want to develop your character and you want to improve whatever's going on that you're trying to get better from, these are situations that you don't want to shy away from, because I know it's going to be uncomfortable to hear that, but a lot of times being triggered and like dealing with the emotions that come up by using these 3 tips is something that is actually like an act of self-love, and it fosters self-development and it helps propel you forward. So don't shy away from feeling uncomfortable. I know that like we don't want to be triggered. It's not fun to be triggered. I personally have had so many times where I was triggered going to the doctors and I just had a relapse in my eating disorder, and thankfully none of that has happened for the past 4 years after I recovered and learned what I needed to do. And I include that all in my book, by the way, that I've been talking about. But it's just like, I've learned that we have to remember that sometimes uncomfortable emotions are pointing us, like we should focus on this and give our attention to what it is that we need to confront in order to push forward, overcome the hurdle, and just get past it. So hop on over to the Eating Disorder Recovery for Women Facebook page. Follow, like, talk about what you think about today's episode. Maybe share a takeaway that you had. What do you think? And I am really excited to see you guys over there. Also, if you're craving a deeper level of support in recovery, look no further than our Facebook community. That's actually a private community, so you have to request to join. We just talk every single day with engaging questions. We talk about our struggles, our wins, and sometimes just plain fun things, because we're all people, but we share a common struggle and we understand what it's like to deal with that every single day. So if you're looking for that kind of support, I definitely recommend that you do have some sort of support community as you're trying your strategies of recovery. That's something that I really needed. Would love to have you there. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this episode to somebody who needs to hear this today. And we will see you all next week. Bye.